Twilight comes early in Boston during autumn. When Linda Miller returned home from the library, the sunset streaming through the trees had painted her windows red. Though she'd spent the entire day organizing books and preparing for the children's reading group, a satisfied smile graced her face. "I'm home, Emma." When Linda opened the door, her 12-year-old daughter Emma looked up from the living room where she was working on her homework. Her bright brown hair was inherited from her mother, while her intelligent gaze somewhat resembled her father's. "Welcome home, Mom. How was the library today?" "Same as usual. But I have good news. The budget for next month's children's book event was approved." Emma was genuinely delighted. Proud of her mother's work, she sometimes helped at the library on her days off. Linda headed toward the kitchen and noticed that David was running late. Her husband had recently been busy with property inheritance issues from his parents' home. David ran a small construction company while dealing with the estate settlement of his parents who had passed away 3 years ago. Discussions about dividing the inheritance between his brother Robert and sister Carol had hit a snag. As Linda began preparing dinner, she heard a car door close outside. David entered through the front door with a tired expression. New wrinkles had formed on his forehead that weren't there before. "I'm home," he muttered quietly. "Welcome home. Was it difficult?" Linda asked gently. David collapsed onto the sofa and loosened his tie. "Robert was complaining again. Says I should hand over Dad's company shares to him." Linda poured a glass of water and offered it to her husband. David's brother Robert was a well-known lawyer in town. He was unhappy that most of their parents' inheritance would go to David. His sister Carol, who ran a real estate business, seemed to share the same sentiments. "Dad, are you okay?" Emma looked up from her homework to ask. David forced a smile. "I'm fine, Emma. Your uncle and I just have different opinions, that's all." "Uncle Robert and Aunt Carol look scary lately," Emma said honestly. Linda and David exchanged glances. Indeed, his brother and sister's behavior had been unusual lately. Especially at last Sunday's family gathering, when Carol had told David, "If you keep dragging this out, we won't hesitate to take legal action." "Don't worry, Emma. It's grown-up business," Linda tried to reassure her daughter. David stood up and headed to the kitchen. "I haven't been feeling well lately. My stomach feels heavy. Shouldn't you see a doctor?" Linda asked worriedly. "I'll go eventually. Right now, I'm swamped with the company and inheritance issues." Linda nodded silently. Her husband had been looking unwell frequently lately. Even when drinking his morning coffee, he no longer had that satisfied expression he used to have. "Dad, tomorrow is my school presentation, right? Will you come?" Emma asked hopefully. "Of course, I promised, didn't I?" David answered while stroking her hair. "No matter how busy I am, I'd never miss your important day." As Linda set the dinner table, she prayed inwardly. "May our family's peace continue like this." But her intuition warned that something bad was about to happen. In particular, she felt uneasy about how unnaturally concerned Robert and Carol had been about David's health lately. "Dinner's ready," Linda called out, and the family of 3 gathered around the table. Watching Emma happily talk about her day at school, Linda was reminded once again of the importance of family. It was an ordinary Wednesday evening. Linda was preparing a chicken pot pie in the kitchen while gazing at the autumn foliage visible through the window. Emma had successfully completed her school presentation and was working on her next science project at the living room table. "Mom, Dad promised to buy me a new microscope if I win first place with this project." Linda smiled. "That's wonderful, keep up the good work. But David's going to be late again. He just called to say his discussion with Robert is running long." Emma let out a small sigh. "Are they fighting again?" "It's not fighting. They're just having an important discussion." Linda didn't want to worry her daughter. In reality, when David had returned home last night, his face was rigid with anger. He said Robert had demanded a majority stake in their father's company. The kitchen timer chimed, and as Linda took the pie out of the oven, she heard the front door open. David had returned. "I'm home." His voice lacked its usual energy. When Linda headed to the entrance, she found David leaning against the wall without even taking off his shoes. His complexion was poor, and his forehead was sweaty. "What's wrong? Are you feeling ill?" "I just don't feel well," David said with effort. "Lately, the coffee has tasted strange. My stomach has been heavy." Emma rushed over from the living room. "Dad, you look terrible." David tried to smile at his daughter, but suddenly his face contorted. "Bathroom." He rushed up the stairs and into the second-floor bathroom.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Candlelight Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
Linda and Emma looked up anxiously. Soon they heard the sound of violent vomiting. "David, are you all right?" Linda called out as she climbed the stairs. There was no response. Instead, they heard the heavy sound of someone falling to the floor. Linda felt her heart nearly stop as she opened the bathroom door. David had collapsed on the floor, completely limp. "David, wake up." She desperately shook her husband's shoulders, but there was no response. He had lost consciousness. "Emma, hurry. Call 911. Dad's collapsed." Emma nodded with a face on the verge of tears and rushed back to the living room. Linda checked David's pulse. It was weak, but still beating. His forehead was hot, and his lips were dry. "Hello, this is an emergency. My husband suddenly collapsed and is unconscious. He was complaining of nausea." Emma brought the phone, and Linda frantically explained the situation. The 10 minutes before the ambulance arrived felt like an eternity to Linda. Emma clutched her father's hand, repeatedly whispering in a small voice, "Dad, wake up." "How long has he been unconscious?" a paramedic asked upon arrival and immediately began checking David's condition. "About 15 minutes, he suddenly complained of nausea and collapsed right after rushing to the bathroom." The paramedics efficiently transferred David onto a stretcher and attached an oxygen mask. One checked his pupils while another measured his blood pressure. "This looks like symptoms of poisoning. Has he eaten anything unusual?" Linda tried desperately to remember. "Not particularly, but my husband recently mentioned that his coffee tasted strange." Emma suddenly spoke up as if remembering something. "Dad's medicine box. Yesterday, I saw white powder in it. It wasn't Dad's medicine." Linda looked at her daughter. "What are you talking about?" "The box where Dad keeps his supplements. Yesterday, when I opened it, I saw a small bag of white powder next to the supplements. I thought it was strange." The paramedics exchanged glances. "Could you bring us that box?" Linda rushed to the bedroom and brought back David's medicine box. When she opened it, there was indeed a small Ziploc bag containing white powder beside the supplement bottles. "We'll take this to the hospital for testing. This is crucial evidence." A paramedic carefully took the bag and placed it in an evidence pouch. David was loaded into the ambulance, with Linda and Emma also climbing aboard. In the ambulance racing to the hospital with sirens blaring, David opened his eyes once but soon lost consciousness again. Upon arriving at the hospital, David was immediately taken to the ICU. Linda and Emma spent anxious hours in the waiting room. Mrs. Miller, a young female doctor, approached. "Your husband is showing symptoms of severe poisoning. We're rushing to identify the substance, but the situation is serious." "Is his life in danger?" Linda asked with a trembling voice. "The next 24 hours will be critical. We're doing everything we can," the doctor answered quietly. As Linda was embracing her daughter, Robert and Carol hurriedly entered through the hospital entrance. Someone must have contacted them. Linda. How's David? Carol rushed over. Her expression showed concern, but there was a certain hardness to it. He's in the ICU. The doctor says it's poisoning symptoms. Robert's face stiffened. Poisoning? What did he eat? I don't know. But the paramedics sent a white powder found in David's medicine box for testing. Hearing these words, Robert and Carol exchanged glances. For just a moment, a look of fear seemed to flash in their eyes. White powder. Carol's voice trembled. That's surely some mistake. Emma suddenly spoke up. No, it's not. I saw it. It was in Dad's box. Robert glared at Emma. Children should be quiet. This is adult business. Linda felt something off about Robert's attitude. Why was he so agitated? Well, David might not make it. Carol suddenly muttered. That sounded like a premature surrender. Robert cleared his throat and said, maybe we should discuss the inheritance, just in case. Linda stared at the two in disbelief. Her husband was fighting for his life in the ICU, yet they were already bringing up inheritance matters. Emma also looked at her uncle and aunt with a frightened expression. Mom. Emma tugged at Linda's arm. I'm scared. Linda came to her senses and embraced Emma. It's okay. Dad will definitely get better. We'll protect him. Just then, a nurse called out from the nurse station. Her name tag read, Betty. She was a kind-looking middle-aged woman, but her expression was tense. Yes, that's me. Linda stood up and placed her hand on Emma's shoulder. Betty looked around and lowered her voice. This isn't the doctor's orders, but, could you bring your daughter to your husband's room right away? Linda was confused. Emma. But I heard children aren't allowed in the ICU. There are special circumstances. Betty chose her words carefully. Your husband has regained consciousness briefly and has been calling your daughter's name repeatedly. He seems to have something important to say. Linda's heart raced. She was glad to hear that David had regained consciousness, but why was he calling for Emma? Emma, Dad wants to see you. Shall we go together? Emma looked up at Linda with an anxious face but nodded bravely. Yes, let's go. In the corner of the waiting room, Robert and Carol were quietly discussing something. Linda didn't call out to them. She felt something unsettling. We'll be right back. David seems to have regained consciousness. Robert suddenly looked up and said, we'll come too. Betty intervened. I'm sorry, but for now, just his wife and daughter please. The patient's condition is still unstable. Robert displayed a look of dissatisfaction but said nothing more. Carol fixed her gaze on Linda. There was wariness in her eyes. Linda held Emma's hand and followed Betty to the ICU. After changing into sterile gowns and disinfecting their hands, they quietly entered David's room. And at what she saw there, Linda was left speechless. David was even paler than before, surrounded by countless tubes and machines. The heart monitor traced weak waveforms, and the breathing sounds coming from beneath the oxygen mask were shallow. There was no trace of the vital husband she knew. Dad. Emma called out in a trembling voice. David's eyelids moved slightly, and he slowly opened his eyes. Unfocused eyes gradually turned toward Linda and Emma. MMA. His voice was so weak it was barely audible. Linda took her husband's hand and gently squeezed it. David, we're here with you. Everything will be all right. David managed to move his neck and directed his gaze toward Emma. Medicine box, did you see? Emma hesitated but nodded. Yes, I saw it. There was white powder in it. Coffee, every morning, something mixed in. David spoke with deep breaths between words. Linda's body froze. What are you saying? Emma suddenly cried out. I know. I saw it. Linda and Betty looked at Emma in surprise. Emma's eyes were full of tears, but they were filled with determination. Last Sunday, when everyone gathered, I went upstairs to get something I forgot. Then I saw Uncle Robert doing something in Dad's room. He was opening the medicine box and putting something in it. Linda covered her mouth with a trembling hand. Emma, is that true? Emma nodded. It's not a lie. I asked the uncle, what are you doing? And he was really surprised and said, just organizing your dad's supplements. But I thought it was strange. David nodded faintly. Every morning, coffee. Carol brought coffee every morning. Linda was confused. She didn't know that Carol had been coming to her brother's house every morning. Lives, near, company. David said, gasping for breath. Every morning, greeting, coffee. Betty, while checking the medical equipment, said, you might want to contact the police. Just then, the door to the room opened, and Robert and Carol entered. Their faces showed a mixture of anger and panic. What are you doing? Robert said in a low voice. Bringing a child in here. Linda stood protectively in front of Emma. Why did you put something in David's coffee? The blood drained from Robert's face. Carol tried to maintain a neutral expression, but her eyes were wide with fear. What are you talking about? This is absurd. Robert tried to maintain his composure as a lawyer. Emma saw it. She saw you putting something in the medicine box. Linda's voice was shaking but strong. Robert scoffed, you believe a child's tale. David just collapsed from overwork. Emma stepped out from behind her mother. Though small in stature, her eyes shone with courage. It's not a lie. I saw it. Uncle was putting strange powder in Dad's medicine box. Carol suddenly moved toward Emma. Be quiet. Children shouldn't interfere in adult matters. Betty stepped between them. Please calm down. The patient's rest is our priority here. David stirred on the bed and said in a weak voice, it's true, the two of them, the inheritance. As Carol tried to approach David, Betty stopped her. If you come any closer, I'll call security. Robert tried to control the situation by changing his tone. Linda, be reasonable. David is hallucinating. It might be a side effect of his medication. Just give up already, Carol suddenly said. You don't understand this family. It took Linda a moment to understand the meaning of those words. Give up. What do you want me to give up? Carol closed her mouth. She seemed to realize she had said too much. Emma stepped forward once more and said in a firm voice, I saw it. Uncle and Aunt tried to kill Dad. A heavy silence fell over the room. The words were so direct that everyone was shocked into silence. Robert suddenly headed for the door. I don't have time for this nonsense. I'm going to call a lawyer. As Carol tried to follow, the door to the room opened, and two police officers were standing there. Mr. Robert Miller, Miss Carol Miller. We'd like to have a word with you. Betty whispered in Linda's ear. When the patient was brought in, I reported to the head nurse that the situation was suspicious. After the drug test results came back, they contacted the police. After giving Betty a grateful look, Linda returned to David's bedside. I'll stay by your side. Everything will be all right. Emma also squeezed her father's hand. I'll tell the police everything I saw. We'll protect you, Dad. David's thin lips changed into a slight smile. Outside the room, they could see Robert and Carol being escorted away by the police officers. Though not an arrest yet, things had begun to move significantly. Back in the hospital waiting room, Linda watched from a distance as police officers questioned Robert and Carol. Emma, exhausted, was falling asleep in the chair next to her. Mrs. Miller. Turning around, she saw Dr. Thompson, David's attending physician. Your husband's test results are in. Traces of arsenic were detected in his blood. Linda gasped. Arsenic? That's. Yes, it's a poison. There are signs he ingested small amounts over an extended period. This is no longer just a medical issue, it's clearly a crime. Linda looked at Emma. Even while sleeping, her daughter was clenching her small hand tightly. It pained her to think that she had burdened this small witness with such a heavy responsibility. What should I do? Linda asked in a trembling voice. The police have already begun their investigation. They need evidence. The white powder found at your home is being tested, but there might be more evidence at your house. Linda steeled her resolve. I'll check our home. At that moment, Nurse Betty approached. I'll help you. My shift just ended. If you don't mind, let's go together. Linda was filled with gratitude. She hadn't expected a nurse she had just met to be so helpful. But why would you go this far? Betty exhaled softly. My sister experienced something similar before. She was poisoned by her mother-in-law. No one believed her. You and your daughter need an ally. They left Emma at the hospital and headed to Linda's house. Linda also contacted the police. There might be evidence at our home. We're going to check. Upon arriving at the house, they put on gloves and thoroughly examined David's medicine box. The bag with white powder had already been seized by the police, but Betty carefully examined the back of the box and found something. Look at this. There were faint white traces on the back of the box. Betty collected them in a small plastic bag. We should have this tested too. Linda headed to the kitchen. David drank his coffee here every morning. David's personal mug was in the sink. When Linda picked it up, she could see a faint white sediment at the bottom. This will also be evidence. Betty placed the mug in another plastic bag. As they were examining the living room, they heard the front door open. Linda turned around tensely. Standing there were two police officers. Mrs. Miller, we're here to collect evidence. Linda breathed a sigh of relief. We've just found a few things. The police officers began searching the entire house. One investigated David's computer in his study, while the other examined the kitchen trash. Look at this, one officer exclaimed. They found an email from Robert on David's computer. David, sign the inheritance division papers now. Otherwise, you'll regret it. The date was just 1 week ago. The other officer found a discarded coffee package in the kitchen trash. This has been opened, but there's hardly anything inside. Betty said, that's unusual. Would someone use up coffee this quickly? Linda remembered, last week, Carol brought over some coffee. She said it was a special blend. The evidence is coming together, the officer said. Now we just wait for the drug test results. As they finished gathering evidence and were about to return to the hospital, the phone rang. It was Dr. Thompson. Mrs. Miller, please return to the hospital immediately. There's been a change in your husband's condition. Linda's chest tightened. Has he improved? Or? I can't say yet. Please hurry. When they arrived at the hospital, police officers were standing in front of the ICU. Emma was sitting in a chair, talking to a female police officer. As Linda rushed over, Emma tearfully embraced her mother. Mom! Uncle Robert tried to get into the hospital room. Linda gasped. What? The police officer explained, your daughter pressed the alarm button. We apprehended Robert Miller as he was trying to approach the patient. And David? He's safe. The attending physician and nurses arrived immediately. Linda rushed to the ICU. David looked a bit better than before. Dr. Thompson stood by his side. The detoxification treatment is beginning to work. He's out of danger. Linda took her husband's hand with relief. David weakly opened his eyes and looked at Linda. Linda. Stay quiet. Everything's all right now. At that moment, the door to the room opened, and a police detective entered. Mrs. Miller, there have been important developments. The detective began to explain. The white powder found in the medicine box matched the substance detected in David's blood. The same component was found in the coffee cup. Most importantly, the same arsenic compound was discovered during a search of Robert's home. And this was decisive. The detective took out a smartphone and played a recording. If that stupid woman had kept quiet, everything would have gone smoothly, Carol's voice. Calm down, Robert's voice continued. If only David dies, the inheritance will be ours. His family won't get a penny. Linda covered her mouth with a trembling hand. This recording. It's from when Robert Miller was talking with his sister in the interrogation room. They were warned that the room had recording devices, but they talked regardless. Just then, David said in a weak voice, "Why, my brother and sister." Linda squeezed her husband's hand. They were blinded by greed. But don't worry now. They've been arrested. The detective continued, Robert Miller and Carol Miller have been arrested for attempted murder and conspiracy. The evidence found during the home search and your daughter's testimony were crucial. Emma smiled slightly. I'm glad I could protect Dad. Linda embraced her daughter. Without you, we might never have discovered the truth. Several days later, David's condition improved significantly. According to the doctor, his body had gradually weakened due to long-term ingestion of small amounts of arsenic, but there was a prospect of complete recovery. On the day of Robert and Carol's first trial, Linda and Emma went to the courthouse. Robert had been stripped of his qualifications as a lawyer, and Carol had lost her real estate license. When the two were brought into court, their former dignity was gone, and they looked defeated. Robert glanced at Linda and Emma for a moment, then lowered his eyes. For the first time, a hint of regret seemed to appear in his eyes. Defendants, please rise, the judge's voice echoed through the courtroom. Linda squeezed Emma's hand. The long battle was finally nearing its end. On a morning when soft spring sunlight streamed through the window, Linda was brewing coffee in the kitchen of their new home. 3 months had passed since the incident, and the Miller family was taking a new step forward. Good morning. Turning around, she saw David standing there. His complexion had returned to health, and vitality had returned to his eyes. After a long hospital stay, he was finally returning to normal life. Good morning. Did you sleep well? Linda offered a coffee cup. David smiled and accepted the cup. Yes, I slept peacefully for the first time in a long while. As the two sat at the breakfast table, Emma came running down the stairs in her school uniform. Good morning, Mom, Dad. Her bright voice seemed to breathe new life into the house. David embraced his daughter and kissed her on the head. You're presenting about the jury system today, right? Emma nodded. Yes. I researched about justice. Dad was saved because there are laws, evidence, and the truth came to light. Linda and David exchanged glances and smiled quietly. After the incident, Emma had transformed her experience into learning and had grown stronger. After breakfast, Linda dropped Emma off at school and headed to the library. She had just returned to work. Her colleagues welcomed her warmly, and many brought homemade food. The support of the community gave her new strength. As the sun began to set in the evening, Linda drove to the suburbs. In a small prison's visiting room, she was face to face with Carol. Why did you come? Carol's face showed signs of exhaustion. I didn't come to forgive you, Linda said quietly. But I don't want to hold on to resentment either. Tears welled up in Carol's eyes. That child, Emma, she's a strong girl. Yes. She taught us what true courage is. That night, the three gathered in the living room of their new home. Outside the window, the spring stars spread across the sky. What will you do now? Emma asked her father. David took a deep breath. I've decided to donate the rest of the inheritance to charity. To a fund that will save new lives. Linda took her husband's hand. They had overcome hardship and become stronger. They realized that trust and love for each other, not money or status, were their true assets. Real family is stronger than blood, Emma said in a small voice. David nodded. That's right. What binds us together isn't DNA. It's love and trust for each other. Linda looked around at her family and felt deeply grateful. Having passed through darkness, they were standing in the light again. Whatever the coming days might bring, they could walk through them together. That was enough. A family photo placed by the window. There, 3 smiling faces were captured. It was proof of a new beginning.